The inventor and scientist Buckminster Fuller said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Allan Savory has spent his life building a new model for those of us managing natural resources and the complex challenges that Mother Nature presents us with every day. His journey has taken him from his childhood in Zimbabwe, where he began his career as a wildlife ecologist, served in Parliament during that country's Civil War, and was eventually exiled to the United States. Along the way, he worked with farmers and ranchers to expand his understanding of the complexities of the natural world. He transformed from a wildlife ecologist who hated livestock for their destructive effects to understanding that the livestock, in fact, could save his beloved Zimbabwe. It was the human beings who were responsible for the ecological destruction by managing both wildlife and livestock improperly. He created Holistic Management International and the Africa Center for Holistic Management, which was awarded the 2010 Buckminster Fuller Award as an organization working to solve the world's most pressing problems. Most recently, to accelerate the learning of holistic management, Allan and other leaders formed the Savory Institute and its global network of regional hub learning sites like ours, the Tallgrass Network here in Kansas. Buckminster Fuller also said, "If you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking." As the Savory Network of Hubs, we are helping others learn and use the tool of holistic management in our regional context. I invite you to follow up with me about things you learn here that you might want to try or learn more about. Allan challenges us and his fans and critics the world over to improve on holistic management, to test it, to expose its flaws, so that it can be continually made better. He believes at his core that nothing less than the fate of humankind depends on our doing so. And Allan challenges himself most of all to discover and to remain humble. He is motivated by a passion to ultimately ensure that the planet remains hospitable for Team Humanity, and he will settle for no less. To learn from Allan Savory is one of the most unexpected gifts of my life. To have sat by the fire in Zimbabwe and listened to his stories of childhood and how he got in trouble in church carrying little monkeys in his shirt is to know him as an eternal youthful spirit. And to know him now as a colleague and mentor is the most humbling honor I've ever received. For the next 2 days, he will challenge you as he has us hub leaders, and he may anger you as he has his critics. But have no doubt, he will continue to push the boundaries of paradigm change. And if we are fortunate, his lasting impact on this earth will be to help Team Humanity face our impending existential challenges to succeed and to thrive. I introduce to you Allan Savory.
Thank you, Julie. That was good. Thank you all for the opportunity to talk to you seriously about real hope for future generations. I'm going to have to begin with the realistic and dangerous situation of today, but this is a talk of hope, not doomsday talk. I will do this and expose the situation we have today, or clarify that, because we're facing great confusion, conflicting views of experts, and leaderless chaos, frankly, in America and worldwide. And all of this begins and ends with agriculture. I hope what I have to say to you will resonate with all the excellent speakers I see we have at this conference and make their work more successful. Now, agriculture is not simply crop production. Many people think it is. Agriculture is the production of food and fiber from the world's land and waters. Forestry, fisheries, wildlife, all of these things are agriculture. If we look at the global situation, on the land, about 20% of the Earth's land is arable under crops. And that's about the American figure as well. But globally, about 6% of the globe is engaged in agriculture. Almost all of the globe is now. And so 94% roughly is engaged in agriculture, but not crop production, mostly production of meat from fish and animals. So with that in mind, let's think about agriculture, and we quickly realize that without it we cannot have a city, an orchestra, a church, an army, a university. Everything we have today in city-based civilization is based on agriculture, and the fate of civilizations follows the fate of agriculture. Today, most farmers are facing real severe problems, while corporate agriculture and stock markets thrive artificially. While that is happening, society and the bulk of the world's farmers are bearing the true cost. Increasing droughts, floods, nutritional health problems, mega fires, emigration, dwindling rural communities, bankruptcies, suicides, aging farming infrastructure, and more. All of this culminating in global desertification and climate change. Now, as farmers, you have always based agriculture on the biological sciences, even thousands of years before we had a single scientist in the world. You made civilization and science possible. Without living soils, high biodiversity and stability, agriculture, frankly, should be based on those biological sciences that ensure that. However, mainstream agriculture is not based on the biological sciences today. If we think about it, it is based on massively funded corporate marketing of oil and technology. As a result, if we look at the published figures of soil destruction alone, we see that agriculture is an extractive industry, mining the world's soil, and it is the most destructive extractive industry ever in the history of mankind. We are producing over 75 billion tons a year of dead eroding soil. That, to make it concrete for you, is more than 20 times the amount of food we need for every human alive today on the planet. No mining of coal, oil, any other product has ever approached the destructiveness of agriculture today. Now, currently, about 2% of society think like many of you do, and I do, that agriculture should be science-based, and I will refer to us as the 2%ers for ease. And about 98% of Americans, and consequently government policies, support agriculture based on marketing, oil, and technology. Now, many people are not even aware that fertilizers, herbicides, insecticides, and all these things we use in agriculture today come from coal, oil, or gas. But what we, the 2%ers, support, sustainable, organic, grass-fed, permaculture, regenerative agriculture, no-till, are concepts we need to dissect and understand if we are not to repeat the fate of civilizations throughout history. Over thousands of years, all agriculture was organic. All animals were grass-fed. We had not yet exploited fossil resources and did not have today's machinery and chemicals. Almost every practice being rediscovered today or promoted by us 2%ers was practiced thousands of years ago. I have been unable to learn of any practice that is genuinely new. Except for holistic management, which I will explain is not a cropping practice. It is, as we'll learn, a management process. We need to heed this fact if what we're calling today sustainable led to the failure of many past civilizations in all regions of the world, if we don't heed that fact, we're going to simply repeat history, as humans tend to keep doing. So as I said earlier, this is not a doomsday talk. However, by and large, we humans do not change until change is forced upon us, or we get a realization that it's coming upon us and our backs are to the wall. So for this reason, I spelt out the pessimistic stuff that I did and where we stand today, so that you can reason for yourselves as individuals, because no government, no university, political party, or organization is capable of that. Fortunately, involved in the no-till movement as you are, you have already chosen to change as agricultural leaders. So let's now see if that change is enough, or what jointly we could do to change the situation I laid out. First, let's resort to common sense. Any time we have a problem, if we deal with the symptoms and not with the cause of the problem, we guarantee failure. Guaranteed. I don't think anybody would argue with that basic truism. Now, fortunately, we believe we know for certain what is causing desertification and climate change, just as we once knew for certain that the world was flat. We were wrong then, and we're wrong again, frankly. Our certainty is that desertification and climate change are caused by livestock, coal, and oil. And the media, celebrities, billionaires, etc., all help our institutions, universities, governments, environmental organizations spread this certainty relentlessly. While research and historical evidence shows us that human organizations or institutions are almost incapable of common sense, individuals and the public are capable of very high levels of common sense. This we saw when the American public acted to bring the Vietnam War to an end against the opposition of powerful institutional forces, or as the public opinion did in Britain to bring about change in the Royal and Merchant Navies after 1 million sailors had died from scurvy, when the remedy had been demonstrated 200 years before. In the United States today, even a child can see that producing oil to produce corn, to produce fuel, is stupid. How many thousands of institutionally employed scientists have signed off on that? We are doing it. So I'm trying merely to illustrate that institutions are almost incapable of common sense. Nobody is bad. It's a function of complex systems. Now, livestock are a resource. Coal and oil are fossil resources. These will be needed for centuries to come to produce products, be it aspirin or food or shoes or whatever. Now, even a child knows that no resource can cause a problem. It's not possible. It is the management of the livestock that causes a problem. It is management that has chosen to run them the way we've done for 10,000 years, causing desertification. It is management that chooses to put millions of animals in factory settings, force-feeding them grain. They do not have beaks, but we try to do it. It is management that chooses to call fossil resources fossil fuels and burn them at a rapid rate. No act of nature is causing either man-made desertification or rapid climate change. Logically, and I believe unarguably, it is management and management alone. I do not know how to put it to you more clearly. If we do not change today's management, that is the sole cause of climate change, we offer little hope. However, if we do change our management at farm and at policy level, we can offer more hope for future generations than ever was possible in the history of mankind. Now, before we can do that, we have some problems to overcome. Almost no one in society or in agriculture is calling for a change in management. And the banana that leaves the bunch gets skinned, as I've learnt over 50 years. Even we, the progressive 2%, are calling mainly for a change in cropping practices, but under the same management that led those practices to cause the failure of past civilizations. So we have work to do, putting our own house in order and throughout society. Now, if management is the cause, what is it in management that needs to change? If I am farming and decide to stop plowing and practice no-till cropping, I am changing a practice. I am not changing the underlying management, how my actions are decided and in what context. Rebecca Costa, who wrote the book The Watchman's Rattle, looking at past failed civilizations, I believe correctly concluded that they did not fail solely because of their agriculture. They failed, she said, because their societies just could not handle the complexity of rising population and deteriorating environment. So they turned increasingly away from knowledge, their equivalent of science, to faith and human sacrifices. And they shelved the problems for future generations. I see remarkable similarity with the United States today. However, here is a simple way to understand that word complexity. We bandy it around with incorrect meaning all too often. If we look at everything we make or build, cities, bridges, toothbrush, satellites, churches, hospitals, electricity from coal or wind and sun, everything we make, everything in this room, what do we see? We can make nothing without technology. Nothing at all. Not even a pot or a clay cup. And we need expertise. I do not know how to make a watch, simple thing like a watch. I'm clueless. You have to have expertise and you have to use technology for every single thing humans make. Now, nothing we make, even space vehicles, involves the concept of complexity. Everything we make does not work if a part is missing, energy source runs out, fuel runs out, whatever. They're not self-organizing. Now, everything we make, we're experiencing successes, amazing successes. There seems to be no end in sight to the marvels of technology and ingenuity. Most hope for the future is built on technology if we think it and look at the media and everything that's going on. Now, let us look at all of the things we manage, from households, agriculture, churches, economies, human organizations, governance. Look at everything we manage at any level in society, and what we find is that we see a different picture. What we manage does not always involve technology, nor does it involve expertise. Everything we manage, our organizations and everything in nature, does not stop working if a person dies or a species is wiped out. It simply changes, carried on in changed form, because what we manage is self-organizing. In systems science, everything we manage is defined as a self-organizing complex system. Human organizations and nature, basically. If we're honest with ourselves, this is where we're running into trouble like one tsunami after another hitting us. Our successes are at the best short term and often followed by unintended consequences and yet further problems. Now, management always involves a web of social, cultural, environmental, and economic complexity. This management complexity, as I will call it, is inescapable. We cannot do anything about it. And it affects our lives from the household to governance. It is this complexity of self-organizing systems that we have never been able to manage well. Now, there is a simple reason for this, our inability to manage this web of complexity. And it is because all of our management is reductionist, and the real world functions holistically and is complex. This we discovered relatively recently, in the early 1980s, almost by accident, as often happens. Now, in about 1985, I was flying through Mexico and got stranded at the airport. I sat sitting in a crowded airport next to a Brazilian civil engineer who was engaged in building this new city from scratch, the capital of Brazil. That was fascinating to me. First time in history building a city from scratch, deliberately, with all modern technology and everything else. We discussed what he was doing for some time. Then he asked me what I was doing. I've always read that question, and I tried to explain that I was working on the greatest problem facing humanity, the failure of past civilizations and present civilization because of environmental degradation. He asked me how I was doing. And I said, well, actually, we have had a breakthrough in thinking, and we're getting some incredibly encouraging results. And he absolutely floored me. He said, it must be very simple. I said, why'd you say that? And he said, because in history, when there's been an insurmountable problem, the solution is always simple. And what I have to tell you today is painfully simple. We're looking for more complicated solutions. It's very, very simple. So let me explain why management is and always has been reductionist at any level. In all management, you have to take an action to achieve some objective, and you have to use some tool. You cannot escape those two facts. You have to take an action and use a tool. Now, before we can take any action, we need a reason or a context for that action. If, for example, I tell you, I'm going to light a fire, you have absolutely no idea whether I should or I shouldn't, whether it's foolish or wise, till you ask me the reason. If I'm going to light it in the fireplace to warm us, to cook our food, makes sense. If I'm just going to light a fire, I could burn the place down. So we need to be aware that every management action needs a reason or context. Now, that reason or context we always do have. And having worked with thousands of people over the last 50 years, I have found that the reason or context for all of our management actions can be broken down into two headings, basically. We are trying to improve our lives through management, and we take management actions to meet needs or desires. That can be to make a profit, grow potatoes, practice no-till, plant trees, raise chickens, get an education, and so on. Endlessly, the list goes. Basically, we're meeting a need or a desire is the reason for the action. And then, secondly, we take actions to address or deal with a problem, present or perceived: kill weeds, stop erosion, prevent drug use, control immigration, preserve a dying out species, secure our borders, mitigate climate change, deal with poverty, violence, droughts, megafires, floods, and so on. The list goes endlessly. And most important is that in the case of policy, all policy without exception, the reason or context is to address a problem, perceived or present. It was not until I was president of a political party leading the opposition in Parliament during a civil war that I came to understand that all that governments do is really to form policies to address problems, and from that, laws and regulations and so on. Now, what can we call such management other than reductionist? When we reduce the unavoidable web of cultural, economic, environmental complexity to the simplicity of meeting our desires, needs, or solving problems, as we do every day. That is reductionist management. And reductionist management, just as it is today, was exactly the same in all cultures through all ages. We don't have any scrap of evidence that people have ever managed any differently. Whether we look at the Roman times or much earlier, it has been the universal management by humans for thousands of years, I believe. Now, as we learned with my lighting a fire example, any management action or objective in which the reason or context is too simple or inadequate is likely to lead to unintended consequences. Now, so common are unintended consequences that economists have developed, jokingly, the law of unintended consequences. And many a true word is spoken in jest. Now, some scientists argue angrily with me that their management is not reductionist because they work in integrated interdisciplinary teams as they're developing policy or management. Teams in which everyone is an expert and fully aware that the policy or actions they are developing will have social, environmental, and economic consequences. Hence the interdisciplinary team to consider all aspects from every expert perspective. However, if you observe them, in every case, that web of complexity is reduced to the problem. Always is. Be it drug policy, war on weeds, or terror, or any other policy, we cannot escape it. The management we have grown up with is reductionist. It is, as I said, universal and has been for thousands of years. Once you are aware of this, you will begin to recognize unintended consequences almost everywhere that you look. War on drugs, increasing drug use and spreading violence. War on weeds has never killed a single weed in a single state while poisoning our water and bankrupting farmers and costing $1 billion a year. Vietnam policy that steadily expanded the war. The present war on terror, spreading terror at phenomenal cost to society. The latest United Nations policies to deal with poverty and droughts, emigration to Europe and more, expressed as 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Most of these address the symptoms of desertification, not a single one addresses the cause. So a predictable consequence, and I will promise it to you right now, is that desertification will worsen, droughts and floods will worsen, climate change will worsen, and emigration to Europe will increase, as will violence and wars across that vast region, the whole of North Africa to China, more than twice the size of the United States. And of course, we have USDA agricultural policy endangering the United States more than any foreign power ever could. When I came to the United States, I just couldn't get over it. At the time, the Cold War was on, etc., and I could not understand why Americans feared the USSR more than the USDA. It just did not make sense. If we look at American policy, it was that was resulting in all the dead, eroding soil being America's greatest single export every year from agriculture, outweighing all grain, all timber, all other exports. The Soil Conservation Service, when I came here, estimated it as a trainload of soil leaving this country every day, 116 miles long. There's no other export we have matching that. And that's the USDA policy, not the USSR. And if we look at history, throughout history, Armies have never destroyed civilizations. They've changed them. Farmers destroy them. They never rise again. So we have every reason to fear the USDA more than any foreign power in this country if we heed history. So now let's look at what we might offer for future generations. A solution to how we might manage the web of complexity was discovered almost by accident relatively recently. This occurred when new scientific insights that made the development of the holistic management framework possible. What we discovered was that we can avoid the trap of reducing the web of complexity to dangerous simplicity, meeting our needs, desires, and solving our problems in any management situation by first developing one single overarching context or reason for management to improve our lives. This is a holistic context that we develop. It is simply a statement of how we want our lives to be tied to our life-supporting environment. And once we have that, we continue with management as before, with all the actions we want to take, just as we've done before, but we do it now in a context of how we want our lives to be. The holistic context is a new concept. It's not in any branch of science, philosophy, or religion. It is, as I say, a statement of how we want our lives to be. We would die rather than not live like that. And that is tied to our life-supporting environment. It's a powerful process because when we develop the holistic context, we have total agreement. We do not even compromise. It is total agreement of what we humans want in a management situation. So let me read a generic holistic context because this concept will be new to some of you. This is one I use when I'm visiting a new country, dealing with people who haven't yet got a context for their management actions, or reading policy or anything like that. So it's a very generic one. Don't just crib it and think you can manage like this, but here it is. And I think most humans would resonate with this. We want stable families living peaceful lives in prosperity and physical security, while free to pursue our own spiritual or religious beliefs. Adequate nutritious food and clean water, enjoying a good education and health in balanced lives with time for family, friends, and community, and leisure for cultural and other pursuits, all to be ensured for many generations to come on a foundation of regenerating soils and biologically diverse communities on Earth's land and in her rivers, lakes, and oceans. As I said, people in almost all cultures would resonate with that. Now, once we have that context, management proceeds as before. We still have to meet needs, desires, we still have to solve problems, and as we do so, we use all of the considerations you do today. Nothing changes there. So we still base our actions on past results, expert opinion, research results, expediency, laws, regulations, compromise, friends' advice, price, cost, cash flow, exactly as you do today. But when we're close to the decision to meet that need or that desire or solve that problem, based on all the research, all the science that's available, expert opinion, everything else, if there's a shadow of doubt, we now institute a series of questions, context-checking questions, just to check that that action, despite all the research, all the science, everything else, will actually be in line with the holistic context that is guiding our management or our policy. It is that simple. So holistic management involves opening our minds to all science beyond beliefs that today have assumed scientific validity. This includes accepting the use of animals in place of machinery and chemicals to solve the biological aspects of desertification and climate change. I will spend time on this subject tomorrow, but for the moment would like to make the point that management, as I said earlier, involves action and the use of some tool. And when we look at the global desertification playing a major role in climate change, there simply is no tool in the reductionist management framework that we use that can sustain the cycle of life in grass plants over about 2/3 of the world's land. These are the vast regions where rainfall is seasonal, humidity erratic, where soil life, plants and animals co-evolve together, including billions of large grazing animals with their moist gut and pack-hunting predators. We have no option but to include livestock as a tool with a change to holistic management to seriously address these biological aspects of desertification and climate change. Now, I'm told that this part of the world, and Kansas, is a show-me state, where people don't believe anything until they see results. Tomorrow, I will show a few amazing changes on the land when people begin to manage holistically. But for the moment, I will talk about what we have learned considering developing policy, which is vital to our future. In the early 1980s, far-sighted officials in the USDA engaged me when I was a political refugee and came here. They engaged me over a 2-year period to provide training for nearly 2,000 officials and scientists, a week of training in the use of the holistic framework. That's a very big sample of American agriculture. Those officials, 2,000, came from all the land management agencies of the USDA and the US Fish and Wildlife Service. They came from the World Bank, USAID as well. Very big sample. They brought hundreds of their own policies during that week of training. They analyzed them, not me. They concluded every single policy would fail and would have unintended consequences. One group in training had a discussion about it, finally made a statement that we wrote down verbatim, and you can read it in my textbook. They said, let me read it exactly. We now recognize that unsound resource management is universal in the United States. That is, to me, terribly significant, that professional people in 1 week of training can come to that conclusion themselves. Think of the change we could produce in America as we begin to put that right. Similar exercises, but with smaller samples, that I did in India and Lesotho had same results. In Zimbabwe, because of past connections and so on, I was able to organize to put on a workshop on policy for 35 members of parliament from 2 opposing parties. These parties opposing each other are in violence. They were killing each other. They make Republicans and Democrats here look like friendly kids playing in the sandpit. Our staff appealed to me not to touch agriculture or land, and I said, never mind what I'm going to do. With them, I began with that great hostility. I reminded them of a speech their president had made in which he said, we do not have a greater problem than our rising population and our deteriorating land. He said, we politicians do not know what to do. All that we can do is take the advice of our advisors, but when it fails, we get the blame. That was such a shrewd statement, true of every politician in the world, and particularly here. So I reminded them of that. I said, we do not have your experts here, so let's see what we can do with land and agriculture. In that great hostility, it was hopeless. I explained holistic framework to them. I said, we need to develop a holistic context. When we had developed a national holistic context without any compromise, the total atmosphere changed. Everything soared above politics. It was suddenly just 35 Zimbabweans working together. If anybody had raised a political point of view, they would have looked stupid. What the hell has politics got to do with agriculture? If any lobbyist had raised any lobbying point of view, they'd have looked stupid. Nobody did. It was so obvious. By the end of the workshop, if implemented, we had the policy the world would dream of. It would be the first country in the history of the world producing more food than dead soil, eroding soil. All food would be nutritious, healthy, growing on regenerating soils. There would be no need for third-party endorsements. Organic, sustainable would be redundant. The tax base of government would increase, enormous benefits all around. Complete change with just developing a policy towards a national, holistic context rather than the problems of agriculture. The same thing will be possible in America, just as soon as it makes sense to enough people in the public that policies should be holistic and no longer reductionist. At that point, agriculture will soar above party and corporate politics to the national concern that it is and should be. And what is most important for the 2% of us favoring agriculture based on the biological sciences is that we will be at the policy table. At the moment, we're not even considered at the policy table. We will be there as equals with the most powerful corporations and corporate, grant-dependent academics. One published result of holistic management that is significant was a study by Dr. Steiner and colleagues at Ohio State University. She and her colleagues studied early adopters of holistic management across the United States from California to Florida. And what they found was that those farmers averaged 300% increase in profitability. At the same time, over the same time period roughly, over 600,000 American farmers left the land, and suicide was the leading cause of death in the exact same markets. I don't know what more to say. For the first time in history, we are addressing centuries of failed agriculture and civilizations. I am not aware of a single case where holistic management has been practiced and not led to improvement. I am aware of thousands of farmers who failed to practice, came for training, got training, but did not change. No different from the thousands, perhaps millions, of people, for instance, in this country, who know that all you have to do to live a longer and healthier life is eat less and exercise more. And they vow to do that. There is multi-billion-dollar exercise industry, and they don't do it. And we lose more people in a year here to just poor diet than all our losses in the Second World War. And we lose that every year. So let me conclude now with where you personally fit in. Why so much depends on each and every one of you. Change requires leadership, but history and science teach us that when change involves new, counterintuitive insights not already believed by society, that leadership simply cannot come from any organization or institution. So people who are constantly calling for government or politicians or organizations to change are simply wasting their breath. It does not happen. It cannot happen when new insights are involved. It can only come from ordinary people like many of you who lead change until public perception changes and then our institutions follow. So what can you do beginning tomorrow to bring about the one thing that offers hope of truly regenerative agriculture than anything in our long history? What can you do to bring about the change in management from reductionist to holistic? You are already showing leadership by supporting no-till. I've milled with some of you last night and today, and I'm incredibly impressed. Every person I've spoken to is open-minded, creative, enthusiastic. This is exceptional in agriculture, so you're already partway there. You're already showing a big change in mainstream thinking. However, no-till, like any other agricultural practice, organic, grass-fed, permaculture, or any other, is a change in practice. That is, however, still under the same management that caused climate change is causing climate change. So how can you go the extra mile to actually change the underlying management, to change the way you manage the web of complexity surrounding any agricultural practice? Holistic management will immediately make all ecologically sound practices, like you're pursuing, more successful than they ever could be under reductionist management. You will not be alone as you change. You will have vast support, and Julie spoke about it in introducing me, vast support from many others in a growing global network of locally led, managed holistic management hubs, including the first university-led hub in Michigan. Hubs in which farmers, academics, government agencies, staff, ranchers, pastoralists, and many others are starting to lead as citizens, as individuals. The Savory Institute is only one node in that growing network of independent hubs, and there to serve you. Now, when we look at policy, we are left with that which has to change if future generations are to enjoy any future. Agricultural policy, I'm sure you understand, is never developed by individuals, but by institutions. So how can we provide the leadership needed before institutional change and brings about policies in a national holistic context? I said earlier, there's not a single case in history where any institution has ever changed and adopted counterintuitive insights ahead of a shift in public perception. This has not happened from Galileo till today. Eric Ashby, who studied such change in Britain and America over the last 200 years, concluded in his research that in a democratic society, institutions simply do not change and cannot change till the public is insisting or changing. As leaders, you will need to shift public perception from vilifying livestock to understanding that management is the cause of our problems. From a TED talk that I gave on desertification, I have learned that the shift in public perception does not have to be large. The short talk I gave, 20 minutes, making sense to over 4 million, now nearly 5 million people, resulted in more change than 50 years of struggle against institutional ridicule, resistance from cattlemen's organizations, environmental organizations, universities, and governments. There's not a single cattlemen's organization that has changed, amazingly enough. Since that talk, the global network of holistic management hubs has developed on 6 continents now, everywhere except the Arctic and the Antarctic. Change is finally beginning, and now you can speed that change by a simple change in strategy, I believe. So let me finish with your change in strategy. Here I need to make this final critical point. If we continue with our present strategy, with no-till and any other of the ecologically sound agricultural practices, we are likely to win. But you can guarantee that it will take 100 or more years still. We're at 2% now. For us to get to a significant percentage in incremental change will take at least another 100 years. So how can we speed this process? The reason why present strategy of all of us concerned 2%ers will take decades is simply because we are promoting different practices in a chaotic situation of short attention spans, tweets and conflicting views, no-till versus plowing, herbicides and monocultures versus polycultures, humane, grass-fed versus inhumane, factory-fed animals, real meat made from plants naturally by animals versus artificial meat made from plants in chemical manufacturing. Compost versus fertilizers. I watch this battle going on and on like a ping pong game as poor, ecologically literate David battles ecologically illiterate Goliath, backed by billionaires, corporations, and celebrities. It's going to take another century. Nature is not going to give us that time. Many more years of lobbying will not speed things rapidly while our ship is sinking. Common sense tells me that it's wise to change strategy. While continuing to promote practices based on the biological sciences, as you need to do in your no-till organization, I urge every one of you to constantly, at the same time, emphasize that management, that is the cause of our problems, has to change from reductionist to holistic management to ensure that your practices do address the web of management complexity. For many of you, hearing this for the first time, you will be wondering what holistic management looks like. So that you can understand that better, I want to give you a couple of very concrete, simple examples, tell you the stories of these. First, when I was providing training some years ago, many people coming to me were going bankrupt, and they were frank about it. They tried everything else, and we were able to save countless families. One couple had come for training. I really liked them. I knew they were in deep financial trouble. About a month or so later, the staff told me that, let's call them Jack and Jill, had lost the farm. And my shoulders sank. I thought, damn it, we didn't catch them in time. I was really sad about that. And then the staff laughed. I said, what are you laughing at? They said, no, holistic management saved them. I said, what happened? They said, when they got home and sat and developed their holistic context, the deep, deep thinking of how you want your life to be, tied to your future life environment, they realized they didn't want to be farming. They were farming because the family expected it. And they decided to call the family together, ask if any other family member wanted to, and they sold the farm. That saved a family, that saved a tragedy. They probably would have ended in bankruptcy, divorce, whatever. That is holistic management. It's not some goddamn grazing system. Let me tell my own story. I live on a ranch in Zimbabwe that every one of you is welcome to visit. You'll have a time of your life. It's close to the famous Victoria Falls, amongst Africa's big game in the wild. Over 4,000 farms and ranches have been taken by the government and given largely to politicians, judges, soldiers, and supporters of the government. And yet I'm still there, still on my land. How? Only through managing holistically. Years ago, my wife and I developed our holistic context to guide our management. When I looked at the reality of Zimbabwe after years of civil war, I could see what mattered to me was living on the land, working with poor people, enjoying the wildlife I love. Ownership is a management decision. So I checked the idea of ownership through the context-checking questions and realized that if I continued to own the land, I would lose everything. So I had to consider how to give the land away. So I chose to give the land away. I gave it away to the people, made the chiefs trustees with me, and I'm still living on the land. I've got 150,000 people looking on it, after it around us, and we're still there. And family and some friends thought I was crazy giving away $6 million worth of land. Now they say to me, how were you so far-sighted? I wasn't. I was just managing holistically. It's a simple case. Two simple cases that I hope will indicate to you how life-changing holistic management can be, and quickly. How it helps to ensure that our management actually improves our lives, which is the intention of all management. For thousands of years, we did not know how to fly. Many men died trying. And on a given day, the Wright brothers flew and we knew how to fly. Within 70 years, we were on the moon. For thousands of years, we didn't know what was causing civilizations to fail. We've been destroying civilizations through management, and we did not know how else to manage. We did not know that it was management causing it. Now we do know, and we do know how to manage the complexity that's involved. Now, because most people are good, and most people are doing their best, and because there's an immense amount of knowledge on our farms, in our universities, government agencies, we're not short of knowledge now that you understand the cause of the problem. It wasn't a lack of knowledge causing our problem. We have an immense amount of knowledge. So with most people being good and doing their best, the moment we shift to management being holistic and policy being holistic, I see the creativity of the humans and farmers being released as never before. I believe we'll truly see the human spirit flying, offering great hope for the future and led by farmers. Thank you.
All right, so we've got plenty of time left before lunch. We're gonna take some questions. So please wait for the mic so that everybody can hear your question. And
Allan, thank you. This is Ray Archuleta. And can you explain to the crowd, because I think sometimes who've never read your book, and I was very fortunate to read your book and change the way I think. Sometimes people don't understand what reductionist means versus holistic. Could you explain to the group who have never been exposed to your writings or ever been exposed to holistic management?
Okay, I thought I'd made that clear, but thank you, Ray, for bringing it up again. Reductionist simply means that in our management, we take this web of complexity, social, cultural, environmental, and economic. You cannot manage without that complexity being involved. And we take it, and the reason for our management is to make a profit, grow weeds, kill weeds, whatever, becomes mead, problem. That's reductionist. Now, holistic just means you still have the needs, the desires, the problems to solve, but we don't reduce the complexity. We embrace it by determining how we want our lives to be based on our culture, our spiritual values, everything. How do you want your life to be? Many of you are prepared to die for your country. Well, what the hell does that mean? What is it you're fighting for? Do it now. How do you want your life to be? Like I read out, and tie that to your life-supporting environment, okay? Now you have a reason for your management actions. So you do all that you did before, and as you're close to making the decision, you just check that it's in line with that. And time and again you'll find it's not in line, so you rethink and go on. Illiterate people learn it very quickly, children learn it very quickly, women learn it quicker than men for reasons we don't understand. Ignorance never blocks learning. I've never seen ignorance block learning. There are only two things that block learning: egos and what we already know. Us men get our egos in a knot and we can't learn. Academics get their egos in a knot, cannot learn. So we have many people who learn quickly. I love the statement made by one fellow who's tragically recently died. He was a professor at one of the universities, and he and his wife sat in an audience when I first spoke about holistic management, and I heard this story from him afterwards, and his wife, and he was getting more and more angry and agitated listening to him. Me and his wife was nudging him and saying, "What the hell's wrong with you? What the hell's wrong with you?" And afterwards, he was expressing his anger, and she said, "It made total sense to me." And they began managing holistically and did a wonderful job, because they had a farm as well. That's very, very common. So if you're male, be careful. If you're an effeminate male like me, it's easy.
Allan, my question to you is, we've studied history and we know that societies fail because of agriculture. How do we get everybody to go with the holistic goal, to get everybody focused together working on it?
Drop that term if you can, because we don't use it anymore, holistic goal. It's a context. It was one of my many mistakes in my learning years. So do try and read the latest textbook. It's simpler, easier, people are understanding quicker. So that word, I know what you're meaning. We replace it with holistic context. How do we get every person to do it? We probably never will. All we need to do is get a significant number of people changing, and then change will happen. Now, people will do it to all different levels. If you come to Zimbabwe, where I live most of the time or half the year, so I'm there watching. I'm not engaged in the management, but I'm watching and guiding all the time. I can tell you right now that you will see it warts and all. We have made so many mistakes. We have done so many things wrong. But because we are managing holistically and constantly just have that context in mind, that holistic context, everything is getting better and better and better and better. So don't be afraid of mistakes. The only mistake you can make is not changing. And get into a support network with others. None of us will do it perfectly, as I say, least of all me and us there, but you will see change. Does it help? Don't try and get everybody to do it. I can't even get my own family to change, some of them. We're given our families, thank God we can choose our friends.
Ellis Yoder, and I've got a question about your Zimbabwe land, and you gave your land away. How do the people who farm it now own the land, or is it owned by the community? And do they use, what do you grow there, and do you use commercial fertilizers, and how does your farm look like in Zimbabwe?
I've got the idea. All right, we are about, I'll talk acres, we're about 6,000 acres amongst probably 10 million acres with no fencing, big wildlife populations, biggest population of elephants left in the world. We've got big national parks, hunting areas around us. On one side, we're surrounded by a forest, a teak forest, and then we have a community, 1 million acres, about 150,000 people under 5 chiefs. And what I did with our land was I met with the chiefs, and I said, look, I propose to give you this land. The way we will do it is I said, you can take the land, you can divide it up, you can settle people on it, and you'll all be poor. Or you can keep the land intact, and I told the story of the goose that laid the golden eggs. I said, we can keep this piece of land intact, laying golden eggs for your children and grandchildren forever. We will give you your knowledge, your dignity back. Do not ask for money, and if there's any corruption, we close the tap. So I will give you this land, we keep it intact. If you agree, they did. So we made a trust, and it's owned by the people. The chiefs are permanent trustees with myself and my wife, and we manage it for the people. So it has our staff on it, our board, which is the chiefs and ourselves, and then our staff management. It is nearly all wildlife. We're running cattle and sheep and goats as the tool to stop the land degradation, the desertification, etc., which was bad. And so the cattle are herded. There's no fencing. Fencing would not pass the checking in a holistic context. Elephants would tear it out anyway. So we have this big management herd of animals that make the rainfall more effective, heal the land. Now, the only cropping we're doing is we have a lot of deaths around us, not a lot, but some. So every year, a few people are killed by elephants or lions, etc., in conflicts. And what I've done is pointed out to the people that they have large, unproductive crop fields, that we're shooting elephants to protect their crops, and it just doesn't make sense. The crops aren't worth protecting. Maize this high and almost nothing on it. And so we now have got a permanent crop field on the poorest soil we have, where it's what you would call no-till. We never plow. We use no chemicals, no fertilizers, nothing. We only use the animals. So the animals come in there once or twice a year, packed in, if you can, just more than an animal to about 2 square meters, and just dunging, urinating, etc. We grow the crops in there. We're averaging 3 to 5 times the yield of surrounding farmers. We're using the same field over and over every year, and we've got walls that we are testing to be able to defend the fields. You'll never stop elephants coming into your crop, but if you're not there to defend it. But when people try to defend the field, they get killed. So we have a wall that can stop a charge, a barrier, and we're testing various barriers, and you can stop an elephant charging you and protect the fields. And showing by what we can yield. Now that's catching on. More and more farmers are beginning to do that now. And so eventually we'll get them with smaller crop fields in that highly unreliable environment for crops, much more productive fields with absolutely everything biologically managed. So that's what we're doing at the moment. And any of you are welcome to come and see and visit.
Up here, Alan. Alan. Right in front of you.
I'm like a rabbit in the headlights.
Straight center.
Yeah.
Alan, Blake Vance from Ontario, Canada. Pleasure to hear you speak today. You had a terrific analogy pertaining to the train and the U.S.'s greatest resource being soil. Can you please repeat that for the audience so we can totally comprehend and again visualize how much soil loss that represents today?
Okay, that is not my story. That came from the old Soil Conservation Service, now NRCS. When I came here, I got that figure from them in Texas, and what they gave me was that the eroding soil, which incidentally is mostly off the croplands, the research was ignoring a lot of the erosion off the non-croplands, and the croplands are only 20% of America, roughly. So anyway, they said that soil loss, to try to get people to understand it, was equal to a trainload of rail cars loaded with soil 116 miles long, leaving the country every day. And that gives you a feeling for what that, like I battle with the worldwide figure, published figure, and it's hopelessly conservative, frankly, is 75 billion tons. Can you imagine 75 billion tons of soil? It's hard to imagine, so that's why I converted that to people we could feed. And that's roughly 20 times the amount of food we need for every human alive today. So you get an idea of the magnitude. Now that loss from our cropland practices and grazing practices is also adversely affecting the oceans, which are our biggest area of agriculture because they're the biggest area of the world, and the most productive area of many of the oceans is the Continental Shelf. Where do you think that silt is going? It's going onto the continental shelves. So they are changing enormously, and those are the most productive areas of many of our oceans. So we farmers are doing way more damage than we understand, far from our farms. But you guys know that.
Alan, a question kind of like that about exporting things. Many of the producers here in the room grow grain that is exported just like that, and so as a country we ship our grain to the cities, so goes our nutrients. Help us understand how we replace those on our landscapes where we're shipping that away yet not bringing the nutrients back, I guess. So help us understand how we bridge this gap as we learn and try and move to a more holistic system that's more enclosed yet overcome our short-term challenges with that, please.
Yeah, there's no specific technique. You're aware of the amount of nutrients you transport away in the crop, all right? Where is most of this stuff coming from? You look at a crop field and year after year you're taking off this crop. Where is most of that coming from, the actual material? It's minerals and a few minerals from the soil, and most of it is coming from the atmosphere. The carbon you're taking in, etc. Right, so the amount of actual nutrients you're losing from the soil is the least of your worries. The worry is the amount of soil lost and the soil life lost. That's what's happening on the farm. So I think the best we can do is just start building the soil. And you've got excellent people, and you're going to have excellent talkers here, all talking to you about the principles, and you know them well. First and foremost is just keep soil covered. Anytime soil is exposed, it's starting to die. Anytime. So the main thing is just keep soil covered. And that's the biggest thing. Now, when you look at the bulk of the United States, you know about the amount of soil exposure on your crop fields. What people don't realize is go and look at most of Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, West Texas, Colorado, Nevada, Wyoming, blah, blah, blah. I could go on and on. You can take that vast area of America and go anywhere and just drop down randomly. And I'll guarantee you'll be looking at around about 50 to 90% bare soil between the plants. Over whole states now. That is completely unnatural. America is just dying. And that is nothing but ignorance in so-called range science, which is an oxymoron. It isn't science. It's beliefs. So the big change has to come with livestock. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Yeah, I would like to just invite you, any of you, I don't want to just be talking to the converted or the choir. I have stuck my neck out far, and I've done it for many years. I want you to chop my damn neck off. I want you to expose if anything I'm saying to you isn't logical or good, based on good science. We cannot afford to go on being wrong. Years ago, I met up with Jim Tier, a professor at A&M, Texas A&M, and we had a strange conversation. Jim, whom I didn't work with, I knew about him, he had a very good reputation, and he said to me, Allan, either you are wrong, and we were not going to be able to dig a hole deep enough to bury you in, or you are right, and the world will not be able to build a monument high enough. And I said, Jim, I don't give a damn what you do with me. It's not about me. It's about saving team humanity. What do you think? And he said, I'm sitting on the fence. It's time to get off the goddamn fence. He died sitting on the fence. That was 35 years ago.
Allan, I have a question. I'm over here. Hi. So how do you separate holistic management from the, say, Savory brand? How is what you're telling us different than, I don't know, falling into a similar corporate scheme? I mean, not saying, of course, that you're doing that, but how is it something that we can communicate to the larger public and actually create change?
I don't, by the way, I hate the name Savory Institute. That wasn't me, that's other people. I don't like my name to be associated because we develop nothing on our own. Everything we do, we're building on the shoulders of others and so on. But anyway, that's what younger people chose to call it, and it is. And they're developing the brand and they run it, and I don't. I'm being put out to grass gradually, which is right? But it's the same. They are promoting holistic management. Their strategy, which is very wise, I think, is to focus on what people call the low-hanging fruit, the grasslands of the world, the 2/3 of the world roughly, that is seasonal environment. Oxidation takes place if anything stops biological decay. I'll talk about that tomorrow, and why only animals can heal that. So they're promoting that, working on the strategy of the grasslands. They're now working on what I think is a wonderful program of land to market, trying to get eventually certification for anybody buying any product, agricultural product, to be able to know that this product came from land that is monitored, measured, is improving, regenerating, and the community is regenerating, the economy is regenerating. In other words, truly regenerative product. So they're working on that, and they're not dictating in any way what your practice should be. If your practice is sound, the monitoring will show your land, your soil regenerating. And so they're working on that as well. We believe that will happen as soon as you're managing holistically. It'll begin to happen. Has that helped? So they're one and the same, except that I cringe at the name.
Hi, Alan. Jim Johnson from Oklahoma. You mentioned drain science. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on using fire as a tool for pasture management, range management.
Okay, we'll talk about it more tomorrow, Jim, but you can understand why people use fire so much or promote it, as you do in Kansas, all right? We're a tool-using animal. You cannot even drink water unless you use a tool, cup, bottle, pipe, whatever, unless you go to a river and drink with your hands in your mouth. So everything we do is tools. Now, what tools do we have? About 1 to 2 million years ago, we got our first tool, sticks and stones. Simple technology. We could chop the sticks, we could chip the stones. We could not change our environment like any other tool-using animal. Then, somewhere just over 1 million years, we began to use fire, and then somewhere about 500,000 years ago, we learned to make fire. And then we could melt the stones and go into the bronze, the copper, the iron age. And then our technology could advance. Everything in this room, every single thing, including the clothing you have, was made possible by fire. Couldn't have made anything in this room without fire. For 99% of human existence, we had two tools, technology and fire. See why we promote fire? Now, what other tools do we have? Training thousands of people and getting them to list every tool they've ever been trained to use, whatever their profession, and then break it down. We did that with 2,000 people to try to find what tools there were. The only other tools there were is the idea developed about 10,000 years ago of resting the environment. Conservation, rotational grazing, rotational crops, rest the environment. So we had a third tool in our toolbox only recently. What other tools do we have? The only other one we have is to use technology to plant trees, plant shrubs, plant grass. Make wine from bacteria or whatever. So that's the full toolbox. There is no tool there that can save the world. Because 2/3 of it co-evolved, the soils did, with millions, billions of animals. So fire, people promote it. When you're managing holistically, you'll use fire, but only when it's in context. So if you come to our place in Africa, we use fire. We use fire to make fire breaks. So by sacrificing 30-meter wide strips, strategically placed, we save thousands of hectares from burning. And we use animals to keep the cycle of life going instead of using fire, because fire doesn't keep it going. Now, I know you burn a lot in Kansas, I'm told, in the Flint Hills, and National Geographic wrote a nice article on it. I wrote to the editor, said, please do not publish my letter. I'm just writing to you because I know you folks. I've worked with you in Zimbabwe during the Civil War. I know how accurate you like to be. And if you ever write something like this again, get a broader opinion than you got from range scientists. Unfortunately for me, they gave it to the Nature Conservancy, and they published it with a Nature Conservancy response from a senior scientist just trashing me on how ignorant I was, not knowing that you have to burn grasslands. No, you do not have to burn grasslands. If you burn grasslands, you destroy them. It just takes time, because the soil becomes exposed. Remember that those millions of acres in America that have got exposed soil between the plants, there are only two things that cause that. Never been able to find another thing that causes it. So when you've got millions of acres of bare soil between plants, the two things that cause it are fire And the only other thing that causes it is too few large animals wandering around. Partial rest while they overgraze plants. And there is no other cause. Droughts don't cause it, nothing else causes it. So when you look at most of America and the amount of bare soil, it's either fire or too few animals. Does
Yes,
that help?
Alan?
And I wish somebody would show me where I'm wrong.
Kenny Smith from Mancos, Colorado. You mentioned the arid West, Utah, Arizona, Nevada. And you also mentioned the federal policies on grazing or lack thereof. And how do you overcome that mentality with the livestock to increase production?
You will do it very quickly when the public perception changes. All right, I mentioned training 2,000 people for USDA. Far-sighted officials in the USDA organized that. Don Sylvester and Ray Margot. Some of you from Nebraska probably worked with Don in earlier years. They were the two guys that arranged that. And we did all that training. The idea was, and what the American officials engaged me to do, was to provide that training. If it made sense, it was logical, they couldn't fault the science, we would develop an American USDA training center. We did the training for the 2 years, and I said, okay guys, it's ready to go on now. I want to return home, because I could by then. I was a political exile here. I met with our interagency training committee that worked with me, and they said, we're not going to be able to form a government center. There's just way too much powerful, politically influential opposition from the universities of Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and California, mainly, and the International Range Society. And so it's not going to be possible to do. So that's why we didn't. And all future training of government officials was banned in the second Reagan administration. That set us back 30-odd years. Only now have we got the first university-led hub, and training is beginning to happen. So nobody tried harder in this country than some of the bureaucrats who are so often criticized. They tried harder than anybody in the agricultural community. Most people don't know that. Everybody is doing their best. Most people are good. We tend to blame a lot. And every time we blame, there's fingers pointing back at us, I'm afraid. So I hope that helps a bit to understand it.
Alan, my name's Grattan Allen. I'm from Southeast Missouri. My question is, I'm not a producer, but if I was a producer here listening to you, my question would be, how can I adapt and change to a holistic approach and stay profitable and do what I do?
Okay. First thing, don't change to a holistic approach. It won't work. You actually have to change management. I'm making a point there. Thank you for giving it to me. We would be arrogant if we thought we were the first people in the history of the world to think holistically. There's evidence of Native Americans trying to think 7 generations ahead, apparently, of the consequence of their actions, etc. But end of the day, all humans, finally, the management was reductionist. So we actually have to practice holistic management and not take a holistic approach. Now, when you do that, the first thing you will do is to become more profitable. It's one of the first things you will do. So before you're making big changes, the first changes will probably be in profitability. Why is that? Because we begin to bring in the psychology. Don't forget, you're now looking at things socially, culturally, everything. Most people in agriculture believe that price and income is where their profit comes from. No, it doesn't. Price and income leads to bankruptcy. The higher the price, the more the bankruptcy is often. Profit comes from cutting costs. And one of the first things you do with holistic management is start holistic financial planning. So instead of planning your finances and planning your income as you do from the crops you're growing, and then your costs, and what is left over is basically profit. We don't do that any longer. Once you're managing holistically, you'll plan your income, even before you change your practices, plan your income. You will then cut it drastically and plan your expenses. So we'll take that income and cut it by 50% and say, okay, now that's the only money you've got, because the cost of production rises to the anticipated income if you're human. So the first thing you'll do is see an increase in profit. When those early adapters averaged 300% profit, that's the main reason. They were doing holistic financial planning. Then you will follow with changes in your practices. And that'll be gradual as you learn. Don't take risks. It is the safest management you can ever imagine. The greatest risk you can take is to carry on as you are.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dan Phelps, Lawrence, Kansas. I'm wondering if you would be willing to further describe your own holistic context and the context checks that you use to make the decision to cease ownership of your land?
I haven't got mine with me, but it's much like the generic one I left out, that when you do it in full, it's how you want your life to be, and me and my wife, whoever you do it, and we want to be more prosperous, stable, blah, 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 the usual things, all right? But it's deep and has meaning for us. And then it's, if you're managing land, it's a description of the land under 4 processes, how the ecosystem has to function through water cycle, mineral cycle, community, biological community dynamics there. Now, if you're not managing land, then it's very generic. The land, like I read out to you, that in an environment that can sustain this forever, etc. And then in the real holistic context, you also describe your behavior, because you have people involved with you who do not make your management decisions, but they're critical to you. The bankers, the extension services, everyone else, so you actually describe behavior in it. Now, I don't have mine with me now, it's in my computer. Right? Now, but once you have that and you're making decisions towards it, the context checks are not the power of it. They're basically 7 questions that you are trained to ask, and you can ask them in any order, and you get quicker and quicker at it. You don't do it all the time. You immediately, intuitively begin to make decisions towards this, what you want in life. But if you've got doubt, then you go through those questions. And they're fairly simple. And you go through them quickly. They're things like cause and effect. Am I dealing with a problem or a symptom? And you just need to think that out. And then the next one will be, what's the source of the energy? You'll be using energy. Is that energy coming from solar, wind? Where's it coming from? And what is the pattern of use of that energy on the farm relative to where I might want my life to be? And then the next one will be, where's the source of the money? Every action will take money. Where's that money coming from? Is it solar, paper, or mineral, dollar? It's very critical. In agriculture, it should be a solar dollar. Almost all of America, it's a mineral dollar. We're mining the soil. It needs to be a solar dollar. So you think that out as a farmer, and you answer that question to yourself. And then you're going through just 7 little questions like that. And each one is, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think? And you do it quickly. And then the last one is where you make the decision or decide to look for something, other possibility. The last one is gut feel. How do you feel about this decision? And if you don't feel good about it, you don't do it. The last one is not how you think, it's how you feel. Have any of you been emotionally upset? Do you feel it in your brain or here? Through your body. The last decision is feeling, not thought. Does that help? Read the book, it's simple. I can't teach you here, but you can read the book.
Thank you, Allan. Let's give Allan another big round of applause, please.
Thank you.